Today I talked on the podcast with Robin Rothenberg, who I discovered through a podcast that I was listening to with Patrick McKeown. I was taking his certification course for Breathwork, The Oxygen Advantage, and I've read Patrick's books over the years, and he's had a huge impact on my approach to understanding breath and learning how to breathe less. And he's really changed a lot of the way that I think from the Buteyko method approach to breathing. And when I listened to her speak, she had written a book recently called Restoring Prana, a guide to pranayama and healing through the breath. And it's like a book with 400 pages. I mean, she's an amazing writer. And she's been in the yoga world since the late 80s. And then she got certified and started teaching in the 90s. And she's a yoga therapist. And she still practices, and she draws deeply from authentic lineages of yoga, but also sees some of the harm that's caused when things are done incorrectly, and has a pretty potent message when it comes to learning how to breathe a little bit more correctly with more awareness. So I thought it would be great to have her on the show because breathwork is something that I'm pretty passionate about and I love learning about. And it's quite a deep rabbit hole when you go and start to learn about the breath, and you start to find people and teachers that have been around this field for a very long time. And it's good to draw from their wisdom and try to share it with others. So I'm continuously learning about the breath, and she's somebody that I think has quite an interesting message. And it comes from a place of care. She really cares about people, and she has quite a bit of knowledge, and she's been in the field for quite a bit. So I thought I'd have her on the show, and I hope you enjoy this episode. It could be a little bit controversial at times where we speak about things that people have different views on. So try to just open your mind, take it in, and see what you can learn, and enjoy the episode. Good morning, Robin. Thank you for
Good
joining me.
morning.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. I really appreciate you, and I came across your work quite a while back, and I came through you to through Patrick McKeown, and I know you know him very well. I discovered his work probably 10 years ago, and it had a huge impact on me, and it helped me to rethink breathing and rethink my whole dogmatic approach to breathing. And I think you came down a similar path, but years before me. You've been teaching and doing yoga for decades. So I thought it would be really cool to have you on to share your message and to learn from you, and then share what I learn with others.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm curious about your word dogmatic. Like, it makes me curious as to like
Well,
what?
it
What
seems
were
like
you?
yoga and humans in general, we get dogmatic and we get ideologically possessed with ideas, right? It seems like that's the
Mm-hmm,
parasite on the mind. And yoga in particular, I found that I healed my back through yoga. So it really did
mm-hmm.
connect me to the mind body. And, in the beginning, you start to find different teachers, and
Right.
some are really good, and some are just good intentions,
Not.
but maybe they've learned from different paths, and they can actually cause more harm than good.
That's
Um,
true.
yeah, and I know you know that, and I'm excited to hear your story and share that with others. But um, yeah, I went down a particular path of movement yoga,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to discover the breath in the float tanks, actually. I started to realize the real
Mm.
essence of yoga was in floating when I was connecting to the mind body breath connection there. And then after I started reading the Yoga Sutras and going down the rabbit hole of yoga, because I got curious
Yoga.
about
Right.
it, I got into the older texts, and I even found this book by Swami Niranjananda. Have you
Mm-hmm.
heard of him? He wrote this cool book called Pranayama.
Oh, I quote
Um,
it all very extensively in my book. Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
yeah, and I love it. And my friend Emil, who's one of my favorite people, he's an engineer, but he's a deep yogi, someone that could probably teach a master class on yoga, but never will because he's such a humble student. He turned me on to that book, and I read it twice, and I could read it 20 more times. And then it led me to Patrick, and Close Your Mouth was the first book I read by him, and then The Oxygen Advantage. And then I took his
Sure.
course and became an instructor, but I'm not an instructor in that way. But anyway, so that was my path. But I realized, man, we've got this breathing thing in the West quite wrong.
Quite wrong.
And so we overbreathe. And And I love what you've been saying about it. And I thought it would be great to hear a little bit deeper and hear your path, how you got to be where you're at. Basically, I just want to find out who you are, your path, how you discovered the Buteyko method and oxygen
Mm,
advantage and some of the other stuff and what you're teaching now. And yeah, let's just go with that.
okay. So where do you want me to start? I was born in no, like where do you, where would
I
you like me
think
to
more
start?
about like your traditional, it sounds like you started yoga back in the 90s.
I actually started in 1986. Yeah,
Much,
before
much
my
longer
it
before.
was yeah, like when my younger daughter was 6 weeks old, and I was a basket case. I had been in bed for 12 weeks with her pregnancy, and I was like I wasn't in great shape before, and I mean not like we think of. I mean, true like physical fitness, but I also was just I had been chronically ill as a kid with respiratory stuff and pneumonia multiple times, and I just always felt tired and achy and just not good in my body. So I was not a physically healthy person. And then I was put on bed rest in premature labor with both my kids. And when I after I delivered Ryan, I was like, my daughter's name is Ryan, spelled a little differently than yours, but
Awesome.
anyway, so after she was born, I thought I need to move. I need to do something because I literally laid in bed for 12 weeks. You can't even imagine how horrible that is. It's a horrible thing. Like getting up and taking a shower was a big deal. That was like
Wow.
my movement of the day was to go take a shower and then get back into bed. Um, so um, there was a yoga studio near my house, and they had a class that was titled Gentle Yoga, and I thought, okay, I think I should start there. And from the first class, I just loved it. It was an immediate yes, like intuitively, every cell in my body said, this may, like, I never heard anybody give yoga instructions before, but I felt like I understood this language. It was like a foreign language, but I understood it. So that's interesting to me because I walked back home from the studio feeling tall. I'm only 5'2", but I felt tall, which is like an exciting feeling for somebody who's always been the shortest person or next to the shortest person in the class. But I just felt great, and I was like, I want to do this. So I just followed that and never stopped. And that was whatever. My daughter's 38 years old now. So yeah. So that's how I got started
Amazing.
in
Wow.
yoga, and that was Iyengar yoga. And so the good part of that was it got me into yoga. It was my doorway into yoga. The unfortunate part of that was that I came in being very unphysically fit, very tight body, very weak muscles, and so I started accruing lots of injuries, one after the other. Like every yoga injury that has been listed, I've had. So that shifted me into more of a therapeutic approach because I kept having to repair what was broken. And so I sought teachers who were more oriented towards therapeutics. And then that led me to just say, I wanted to, I mean, at that point I was teaching, I was a certified instructor in the Iyengar tradition. I've, I've got to figure some other way of doing yoga because this isn't working for me. And that's when I met Gary Kraftstyle of the Krishnamacharya tradition, Vinaya, and that's a very breath-centric practice. And having had all of the breathing issues that I had had before, I was drawn to pranayama, but I was not very satisfied with the approach to pranayama and breathing in the Iyengar method because it was all about your posture and actually not very much about the breath. So when I started studying with Gary, and his approach was very much about the breath and lots of techniques about different ways of breathing and using breathing therapeutically. And my respiratory capacity improved, and my not only was I healing on the structural level, but my mind was getting clearer. I did deep dive into the Yoga Sutras. It was like it felt like, oh, this is what I always believed yoga was. Like I don't care where my pinky finger is. It's like, where's my mind? Is my mind in alignment with my heart, with my intention? Am I living in integrity? Like that felt like the more important questions. that Gary said, yeah, this is what yoga is really about. So all of that was really working well for me. And then in my respiratory issues abated. I wasn't having the chronic cough anymore. My energy was good. I was doing pretty intensive pranayamas in terms of slow breathing, like inhale 10, 15 seconds, exhale 10, 15 seconds, up to 20 seconds with breath holds in between, and felt very comfortable doing that. And then, back then I didn't know what happened. Now I understand what happened, but there were a variety of things that came together. One was that I started doing 10-day trainings where I was teaching from 6:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. Don't recommend it. Like talking. And then my granddaughter was born, and so I was taking care of her. So I was cooing and like that. And then I had stressors. My mom was diagnosed with dementia and needed a lot of care. My husband was diagnosed with MS, needed a lot of care. So anyway, there was a lot of energy being put out, and I started coughing a lot again. And then I started getting these respiratory infections again, which I hadn't had for, a good decade. And I started feeling tired again and achy again, and all my symptoms came back. And then I got a respiratory infection, and I couldn't stop coughing for 3 months. Nothing worked. And I tried every pranayama, I tried everything I knew, and nothing worked. And how I learned about Buteyko is actually, I had known about Buteyko because one of my longtime students who was a severe asthmatic, in the process of our work together, discovered Buteyko, and it completely transformed her breathing and reduced her, her reliance on inhalers and nebulizers, and kept her out of the hospital and all kinds of really positive things. And I thought, that is so great for her. I have pranayama, but I don't need that. But then when I got this really bad respiratory infection, and then I couldn't stop coughing and nothing worked, and I went to my naturopath, and she had me breathe into the spirometer, and she literally said, that sucks, Robin. Do it again. That can't be right. She's like, you have asthma. And I'm like, I do not. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, call this student, right? Like, I have to call her. And so I literally went home and called her, and I started working with her. And from that very, very first class with her, I did 5 days in a row. And from the first class, my coughing reduced 75%. My energy, by the end of the week, my energy was up, my brain was working again. I felt like me, and I was like, okay, wait a minute. This is the opposite of everything I was ever taught in yoga school. And I'm having all of these positive effects on my health. And my mind is so clear. All of the things they say pranayama does, but the pathway is the opposite of everything I've been told. I don't understand. So I was like, I have to understand this more, because that's how I am. I've got to know. Inquiring minds, this is a very inquiring mind. So I literally, before the week was over, I'm like, how can I learn about this Buteyko thing? And Patrick was teaching in Ireland, doing a training. And so I signed up for it. I was like, oh, I'm going to Ireland in April to study with this dude, Patrick McEwen. I didn't know. Nobody in my world knew of him. And so, and I just kept practicing. And I was like, I'm like a scientist. So I'm like tracking and keeping notes and being like, I notice my appetite. I'm noticing this. I'm noticing my sleep. I'm noticing all these things that are being affected. And I'm just completely taken, like nothing has ever held my attention the way this did. And in part because I was so like, how is this possible? I'm having this experience, and it's not what I was taught is how to have that experience. So anyway, I studied with Patrick. That week was, transformative. And the whole time I was there learning about the physiology, I'm thinking, nobody ever talked about CO2 or nitric oxide or any of, like the biochemistry of breathing. Nobody taught me this in breathing in yoga school, right? And I'm considered a breathing expert, and I work with people with chronic pain and chronic health issues, and I don't know this. This is a problem. I don't know it. I'm just learning it, and my colleagues don't know it, and this is a big problem for our profession. So I was there in Ireland thinking I have to write a book as soon as I understand this physiology enough that I can write about it. So I came home, and the first thing I did was like, I've got to make peace with the yoga part because I felt really betrayed. And yoga has been such a cornerstone and foundational support in my life through a lot of challenges that I've had in my life. And it's always been my one reliable, like go back to the sutras, the wisdom is there. Get on my mat and practice, and I find my center. Like always, 100%, there's a way in. And I'm like, how did they get it all wrong? So I went back to the original text, and I'm reading it now from this different lens. And I'm going, oh, they didn't get it wrong. Breathing is all, like literally all of the texts say the same thing. Breathing, pranayama is about restraining the breath, retaining prana, which means you're not putting out a whole bunch. And it's synonymous with kumbhaka, which is breath holds, which is about not breathing. So pranayama is about the not breathing phases of the breath, not about inhale and exhale. It's about increasing, which when you understand, as you do, the biochemistry, you know for an absolute fact, the only way that you can be comfortable not breathing is by training yourself to breathe lighter and less. You absolutely cannot get there by breathing more because it takes chemistry in the other direction. So I'm reading this, and I'm reading one text after another, and I'm like, I feel like, okay, now this is the book I need to write. I need to really base it in the yoga tradition, weave in the Western science, substantiate everything so nobody can say, who is this woman? What's she making this shit? Right? Like, can I say that? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so that was my vision. And then I said to Patrick, at that point, Patrick had been to my studio, and I'd sat in on his trainings enough that the physiology started to make sense. And I started to feel like, okay, I think I could actually write it. I think I could actually make it make sense to others. I could teach it. And I told him I wanted to write the book, and he's like, you have to, and I'll do anything I can to support you. He's like, he's the most non-yoga yogi I know. He's way more yogic as a teacher than many of my yoga teachers in terms of not having an ego and being generous with his knowledge. He's awesome. So anyway, so that, that's how I ended up writing the book. And then there's a whole story about what happened in the world of yoga therapy when I brought these ideas to them, because it wasn't like they went, oh, awesome. This is something we didn't know before.
Yeah, and I'd love to get into that, the pushback that you've gotten, especially like when you come to these conferences. You were here in Scottsdale at one of the bigger ones, and I have lots of friends and people in the communities of yoga that are, they're in that this is the way, and that's not wrong because we all go through these phases in life, and I've been
Right.
there with certain elements of religion and belief systems of my own, and it's nice to work with your own belief systems, have compassion for other people that have
Yes,
theirs, and realize we're all living in a reality tunnel. We're doing our best, but for you to
exactly.
go and you actually had the humility to take the advice from your student, which is great, and that is the ultimate teacher, is someone who's always the beginner's mind, the student, and always learning from everyone, not like I'm the superior, you're my student,
Yeah.
why would I listen to you? So that's amazing to hear that part of your journey where you learned from your student. It led you down an
That's
avenue.
ever going. I think I mentioned to you that I taught boot camp this morning. One of the students in my yoga therapy training program, she does kettlebells, and she gave us a little snippet at the retreat we had recently, and I'm like, I want to do a series with you. I want you to teach me kettlebells.
That's
And so
amazing.
I've been learning from her. She's, I mean, it's
That's
fabulous, and I feel totally like, thank you. I'm so grateful because now I know a bunch of stuff I didn't know before.
absolute childlike wonder and the passionate curiosity is what keeps us young, and it keeps us constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
And I always think awe and wonder and curiosity are like the driving force, and then creativity, of
Yep,
course, on the other end of
exactly.
it.
And
So
I
I
think it's a natural evolution. If you never assume that you already know, then there's always a question mark and the possibility for something fresh to come in.
yeah. And the more you find out, the more you realize it just gets more interesting and
It
weird.
does, and it gets intricate and woven together, and like I never know, like how am I going to put these pieces together and what's going to come out? It's all like, you know,
Totally. Yeah,
it's
my
an
friend
experiment.
Emil, when he turned me on to that Swami Niranjananda book,
Yes.
that was a real eye opener for me because I did get swept into the Wim Hof method for a while years
Mm.
ago, and so did he, and the over breathing methods that are really trendy right now. And not
Yeah,
saying they're
holotropic
wrong.
breathing.
Holotropic. I went to Stan Graf's workshops and Dan Brule and all these teachers, and I was like, wow, this stuff's powerful, and it is.
It
And
is. It's
there's
powerfully
useful.
dramatic.
Yeah, and I think there's moments in time where we can look at those and go, okay, they have their use, but you better be careful.
Yeah.
It's like just like psychedelics. It's like there's this huge wave, everybody's rainbows and butterflies. Let's talk about them as they're great. It's like they're just non-specific amplifiers and they can be
Yes.
super dangerous. We should be careful. And we should look at our elders and ancestors and find out like what went wrong first and how can we
Absolutely.
learn from our mistakes and maybe be humble stepping into these realms of breath because the
Yes.
breath is so powerful. And I always now when I'm sharing it with like the new recruits, which I'd love to learn from you before this conversation's over, like what you'd want to share with new firefighters that are coming
Hmm.
into the force, and maybe
Yeah.
even someday we can have a separate conversation about that because I'm in the midst of trying to create a program for these younger people saying like what would I want to know when I was 23 years old
Yes.
about the breath to manage the nervous system and to manage my
Absolutely.
whole, it's everything, it's the root of our ecosystem.
So I'll share with you one of the most inspirational presentations at the conference that I just attended was one of my colleagues, Shanti Prakasa, and her group who are part of the Kundalini yoga tradition. They are in Ukraine and they are teaching yoga, right? Techniques to manage the trauma that the troops are living with, that the mothers who have lost children and lost spouses,
Wow.
the those who have been injured and are amputees, have traumatic brain injury. They are right there on the ground teaching the troops in uniform, where they've got their whatever, their AKs, whatever, right on their back, and they're doing yoga because they might have to go and fire off, but like they can also regulate their nervous system right now here in this moment. Fascinating
It's
and
amazing.
so amazing.
Wow, we need more people doing that for the everyday folks, average teacher, plumber, doctor. I mean, all human beings are yogis, they just don't know it. It's just we've sort of lost that mind body connection, and the breath is the tool, but then they get swept into all these new trends, which is
I know.
it's just there. It's there with everything. It's a business model now. Everyone's got a breath workshop, and everyone's got
I
a
know.
class for $3.99. Come on down, and I'll teach you. And it's just like anything. Find really good teachers. Be careful who you engage with, because at the end of the day, it can be also damaging. And that's why I like your journey and your stories, because you talk humbly about how you've been injured through yoga as well. One of my favorite teachers here, I don't know if you know her, Emily Stooks, years ago, really sweet
Mm-mm.
lady. And she used to tell me, like, I've had knee injuries from yoga because I was overstretching. And um, John Salisbury, he's been teaching forever too, and more of the movement. He's a very good movement coach. And I'm like, yeah, those are hard poses. And is it even good to be doing those poses for that many years without the counterbalancing and the strength training? And so I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that, on injury through yoga and also
Oh,
through breathing, over breathing.
well, I mean, it's similar and different, but in terms of the structural piece, the asana piece, I'll say here's what's the same about whether you're teaching breath or movement. If you don't understand somebody's starting place, then you have no business teaching them. It's a potential liability. If you don't understand the condition of somebody's structure and you're taking them into asana, it's a setup for injury because if you as a teacher haven't inquired and gotten some history and some understanding of, oh, I had this surgery or I had that injury or whatever, then how do you know how to adapt and teach appropriately? And, you know, the person comes in with their story. They know their story. They know their experience in life, but they don't know yoga. So the student is always going to strive to please the teacher. That's just the psychological dynamic of teacher-student relationship. So if you say, move this way, make this shape, the student is going to try and move that way and make that shape, whether it's good for them or not. They're going to assume you as the teacher wouldn't be instructing them to do that if it wasn't good for them. And besides, everybody says, yoga's good for you. Yoga's so healthy. Yoga's good for your back or whatever. So if I'm in pain as a student, it clearly is my fault. I must be doing it wrong. I must suck at it, whatever. That's, you know, this is, so as teachers, we need to raise the bar on ourselves. Get better training in anatomy and physiology, functional anatomy and physiology, not attached to an asana, dogmatic asana practice. The best teachers for me about how to work with asana were experts in anatomy and physiology. They were not attached to my yoga practice, what I did on a mat. They said, this is how the body functions the best. And it turns out strength is more important than stretching in terms of longevity, in terms of health. So people who only stretch and don't strengthen are weakening their structure. And women in particular who only stretch and don't do strength work and go through menopause are particularly vulnerable, because when estrogen goes down, the capacity to maintain muscle also goes down considerably. So I always say to my students who are largely women who are postmenopausal, if you're not building muscle today, you're losing it. And that is a problem. It makes every joint in your body vulnerable. So,
and it seems like a lot of the kids in class or people in class are trying to keep up with the other students as well, because there's like a need in a flow class or in these movement classes. Everyone's like, well, if they're going that speed, which is usually ridiculous in the West, we just try to keep up. It becomes this almost anaerobic workout. And it's like they're not connected to the breath, and they don't know the physiology. And so next thing you know, you've got blown out shoulders, knees,
absolutely.
more cortisol.
Well, I mean, and I'll take responsibility. The combination of my pitta drive. I'm a very, ambitious, competitive with myself person. I always wanted to get the A and do the best, and like I have a high bar expectation for me. I'm not in competition with anyone else except on the pickleball court. I play to win, but like that. And then the Iyengar system, where it's like, this is the right way to do it. So I kept trying to do it right, but it was wrong for my body. And so my injuries were because I was striving to look like my friend Kat, who was super flexible and a dancer and could do everything, right? I wanted to be like her, but I was never going to be like her. My structure was never going to, she had a completely different body type than me, right? But she got all the kudos from the teacher because she made it look so asana beautiful. And I always needed extra props and help because I did asana ugly, apparently, So I wanted to become beautiful, but in the process of striving to externally match what was going on out there, I really damaged my body. But there was learning in that too. At some point I said, this is not working. I don't want to be in this kind of relationship with my body. I want to learn how to be in loving relationship with my body, and I want to do yoga in a way that doesn't hurt me. And that's when I shifted to Vinyasa, and it was a much better system for me. And there was all this whole world of adaptation. There is no perfect form of a pose. The pose is supposed to be functional for the person. So that leads me back to the breath, because it's the same. I use the same rule of thumb. As a yoga teacher or a breath teacher, if you don't know somebody's starting point, you don't know how functional or dysfunctional their breathing is. If you can't assess that, both biomechanically and biochemically, what's going on with them, then you ought not to be teaching them any kind of extreme breathing practices, because it could throw their chemistry off and their nervous system off even more. So again, the answer for both is more education about the nature of like how the body works, and then take the pranayamas. If you understand that, then you can take the pranayamas, and none of them are good. Like Kapalabhati isn't bad. Breath of fire isn't bad. It has good things about it. It just isn't the right breath for a certain segment of the population. But if you don't know that, and you don't know how to assess that, and your teacher has said, everybody do Kapalabhati, and it's like handed out like, candy, everybody gets one, then you're potentially causing harm. You're not practicing yoga in the ethical sense of ahimsa, of non-harming.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of this man. He's here in Arizona, I think, still. He's the Olympic gymnast strength coach for like 20 years, Coach Summers.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. The strongest athletes in the world that are the most flexible, good balance.
Good
These
balance
athletes are
between the
incredible.
two. Yeah.
But he goes, I start a 22-year-old super strong athlete. I say he brings them back to the fundamentals and he keeps them on fundamentals for 1 to 2 straight years, even though they're capable. But he goes, if you don't get those little tiny foundational movements
Yeah,
down, you have no
exactly.
business being up on the rings. And so I love the way he approaches movement. And it's not from a yogi perspective, but it really is. He
Oh,
actually, you know,
I actually think it is. I mean, I think the wisdom of yoga is that if you stay really deeply attuned, you learn pretty quick. Like I was in my boot camp. I'm teaching women mostly, and they're mostly over the age of 50, some of them up into their 80s. And they want to do strength training with me, right? Because I do it in a way that's safe. And they were mostly using bands and 5 pound either dumbbells or kettlebells. We got a good workout. I mean, like, I got guns. I
yeah.
don't do like, but I know how to work. I know how to work in a way that I'm using my whole body, not just this muscle or that muscle, but my whole body to support. Everything is done very mindfully, working with the breath. And it doesn't take a lot of weight. If you're going slow and mindfully, you get a lot more with a lot less, just like the
Mm.
breath.
That's amazing. Yeah, and it's nice to change your ways of thinking over time, which is what ends up keeping you healthy because you're not stuck in that traditional. I don't know how many firefighters, and I love these guys, but they're in their 50s and 60s and they go in the gym, no warm up, lay down, get a bench press, load it up with tons of weight. The worst exercise you can probably do for your shoulders. And they load their chest and shoulders with this thing, and they're in pain and they're pushing through pain. And I saw that pretty early on because I was brought up in that old mindset of bodybuilder, lift
Mm-hmm.
heavy, get
Mm-hmm.
strong, all sort of superficially strong, not real
Yeah.
strong like that. The gymnasts are the strong guys, the calisthenics
Yeah.
guys. And I started to reverse engineer that through movement and breath and yoga. And then it leads to like you can be strong, really strong, probably stronger than you were with those barbell lifts. And you're not destroying joints and destroying your
Exactly.
body, and sometimes we have to get hurt and be humbled by our injuries to learn that they're our teachers.
Yeah.
So,
It's that nice balance between strength and stretch, right? And my classes always incorporate both, and a lot of strong core work, and of course strong core and functional breathing go right together. You can't have one without the other. So I
yeah,
love that because it's efficient.
yeah. And then the kumbakas, it's like nobody's really taught the kumbakas. I'm lucky to have a teacher named John, and I go to his fundamentals, and I'll probably go to fundamentals yoga for the rest of my life because I feel like that's the base for me is, and I can stay right there and learn something new every day and not need to go to some advanced flow class or whatever they want to call it with heat. And
Mm-hmm.
he teaches a lot of the pranayamas and the kumbakas, and it's so do these old books. And
Mm-hmm.
with breath work now, you go to these classes and it's just breathe, 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 breath holds, no locks. And can you
No,
speak to
right.
some of
No
what your
bandhas.
knowledge is on the bandhas and the kumbakas and the breath holds and how dangerous it can be to do breath holds without having the right bandhas?
Um, Dangerous is a strong word. Um, so uh, here's the thing: the bandhas, like actual, like in regular, as in daily bandha practice, required a certain lifestyle, right? I would say this: no drinking, no caffeine, like no sugar, like really regulating your diet, when you eat and how you eat, in order to maintain that. Like it was a whole lifestyle. It wasn't just like bandha's over here, like you do your bandha practice and then you go live your schmoozy life doing whatever. Like it was all about tapas and like maintaining that discipline. You're never away from your higher intention, which was samadhi. I mean, so like, let's just have that over here. Okay. So I'm always extrapolating, going, okay, but there's something of value in that. And me and most of my people are not going to live that lifestyle. So how can we take what's useful there and bring it in? I got very into the bandhas before I got into the Buteyko breathing, because I was doing a lot of work with the lower back. And I was hired by a group of researchers who were funded by the NIH to put together a yoga protocol, yoga therapy protocol for the lower back. And that study ended up being published. It was the first randomized controlled trial using yoga as a therapeutic technique for anything. It was the very first randomized controlled trial. And it was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in 2000 because the results were fantastic. 78% of the people who did the yoga, as opposed to the PT or the book, ended up having sustained increased quality of life, decreased pain, ability to get back into their favorite things, whatever it was they like to do, decreased in meds, all of that. So they wanted to replicate the study, which we did, and make it bigger, which we did. And the results of that were published in the Annals of Internal Medicine because, again, they were very high, 63%. So if you know anything about the world of low back pain, nothing beyond placebo gets above 50% effectiveness. I don't care. Surgery, chiropractic, massage, nothing.
Yeah.
And yet we did. So there was something there. So in that process, that was right around that period of time where I was working with that I was introduced to Tom Meyer's work and Anatomy Trains and the whole fascial anatomy piece. And I went deep down into that rabbit hole. And simultaneously with that, the anatomy teachers who were introducing that, bringing that to me, who, by the way, were students of mine, who were in my training and who were structural integrators and chiropractors. And they were like, Robin, can we do a little blurb on this? And I'm like, yeah, but how about you do a big blurb on this? And then how about you teach me, because this makes sense. So one of them did a whole training on the core, like how to really engage the core. And she came back and she taught me, and that just changed everything. So the core muscles, primary core muscles, the pelvic floor, the transversus abdominis, the multifidi in the back, and the diaphragm at the top. It's like a barrel. You've got your diaphragm at the top, pelvic floor at the bottom. You've got your TVA, which wraps around, and then like a little corset, and then the laces in the back, the multifidi, the deep paraspinal muscles. And taught me how to engage it and how to work with it. And I wove in naturally how I'd already been working with the breathing, with activating the abdominals to support exhalation. But then I brought my understanding about pelvic floor to the lower TVA, to the upper TVA, to the multifidi. And of course, all of that supports better movement of the diaphragm, which is a very good thing. And the focus being on the exhalation breath, which is good for parasympathetic tone, vagal tone, right? And not on taking a bigger breath in. So all of that was very supportive and helpful in helping people with low back pain. So I've been doing that already for years. So then I took that biomechanical piece and then added the Buteyko, the lightening of the breath, and the kumbhakas. And then I understood the bandhas so much more, because when you're working with the bandhas, which is the I don't know that does everybody listening know what they are? We're talking about them, but do they
Probably
know?
not. I mean, this is going to be a very wide audience, not many yogis. It'll be nice, the yogis that it hits, but this is great to describe them.
Okay. So, I mean, I have whole visuals. I have all these slides where I go over the bandhas and the muscles. But the muscles of the pelvic floor support the whole bottom infrastructure of the torso. I mean, they support good urogenital health, but they also work with the spinal health, like really supporting the spine from, like having a good foundation. And they're multi-layered, so it's not just like one flat muscle. They're a weave, a sling of muscles, and they are activated in a variety of different directions. So toning those matters, and it turns out that the best exercise that tones the pelvic floor is abdominal diaphragmatic breathing, because the diaphragm and the pelvic floor are intended to move together. And if you understand that they are also fascially interconnected, so the fascia is the connective tissue that weaves one muscle, let's say, to another through the joints, actually all through the bones it's woven in. So it's, as opposed to thinking of this muscle separate from this, they're actually in relationship and woven in. So the pelvic floor muscles and the transversus abdominis, which fill the gap between the pelvic floor and the diaphragm, because the transversus abdominis attaches to the pubic bone and the bottom of the pelvis, and then all the way up to the ribs, lower rib cage, just like the diaphragm. So it literally spans, it wraps around the torso, and the way it strengthens, it contracts horizontally. It's a horizontal muscle. So it moves this way. So when we're breathing, if you engage those muscles, that set of muscles together in concert with the breath, everybody gets better. And the yogis figured that out. So the root lock, the bandha, called the root lock, Muladhara Bandha, it engages and strengthens the pelvic floor muscles. And Uddiyana Bandha is the contraction of the transverse abdominis in relationship with what's below and above, the pelvic floor and the diaphragm. So it's working them all together and suspending the breath simultaneously, which makes sense because it fixes the rib cage and it keeps the diaphragm from hiccuping and asking you to breathe. So it enables you to suspend the breath for longer and longer periods of time. Like anything else, it also requires training to build the endurance to do that. So it's not something you can just haphazardly do and be like, oh, I'm just going to do Uddiyana Bandha now. Like, if you want to literally do Uddiyana Bandha, you need to do it regularly, and you need to practice holding it 4 seconds and then 5 seconds and then 6 seconds. And just like we do with our breath suspensions and building those up, you do it progressively, consistently over time. Sutra 112.
And those
Abhyasa
breath holds,
Vairagam.
are usually on the exhale, correct? Just so people listening.
Yes, the breath holds that we're talking about with the bandhas are always
Sorry, you
done
froze up
on
there.
breath suspension, because that's when everything contracts inward, the diaphragm moves inward. When the diaphragm moves inward, the ribs move inward, the abdominals move inward into their contracted active state, and the pelvic floor muscle also moves upward. So everything moves in and up. Hold, 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 and then inhalation is that expansion and opening, right? Down and out with the rib cage as the diaphragm moves down and out and the abdominals relax. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I got lucky and healed my back. I had 3 bulge discs and a tear, which is very common for firefighters, especially, but
I
most
bet.
people in life get that injury because we wear those big SCBA
Yeah,
packs, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very,
No,
very
most people in
strange.
life do not get that injury. Thanks God, most people in life do not have that injury. But
True. Yeah, I guess it's
but
most people in my
construction
world.
workers and people in your world, yes, are
Yeah.
more vulnerable to it.
And I was told I needed surgery and pain meds and the whole. Thank God I didn't do any of that, and found some yoga and got connected to the body. But I'm curious some of the pushback that you got when you started to learn the Buteyko method and learn from Patrick the oxygen advantage stuff, and you started to bring that back to the yoga world. Talk
Hmm.
about some of that you get at the conferences or to your
Yeah.
students even, and how hard, or how did you figure out how to bridge that gap and communicate it in a way that was not
Yeah.
in their face? Or I'm curious how you went about that.
Yeah. So I studied with Patrick in January 2016, and I uh, submitted a application to present at the International Association of Yoga Therapists conference in June, and I was invited to come and present on this. So I would say this: I thought a lot about how I was going to present it. I was I'm not a nervous person with presenting. You know, I have a lot of confidence and I feel really comfortable in front of people, but I was nervous about this because I knew it was going to at the least be cause people to kind of go, huh? And potentially have people go, who the F are you? Right? Like my teachers, my lineage, blah, blah, blah. So I knew it could be a problem. I have a very good friend who's a wonderful graphic artist, and he actually is a student. A lot of my friends start off as my students, and then we just end up collaborating and learning from one another. So anyway, so Roy created some really fun kind of comic strip graphics to go along with my PowerPoint presentation, which I think helped. Humor always helps. So anyway, I presented, I was given the opportunity to present twice. There were 400 people, about 375, 400 people at the conference total. I had 200 people signed up for each of my presentations. So I think almost everybody at the conference was like, what the hell is this? And especially after the first one, then those people talked to, and then other people came. It was very quiet in the room.
What was the title of your talk, if you remember?
So I don't remember exactly, but I think it was something like, um, something about less is more, right?
Okay, cool.
Pranayama, breathing, you know, breathing less to heal more, or something like that. Um, so I noticed right off the bat, like some of my colleagues, the people that I love and just respect tremendously were sitting, listening to the whole thing like this, like mouth breathing the entire time. And I'm like, and and I'm talking about mouth breathing, and I'm looking at them like, come out. And right? And I'm seeing eyes pop, and I'm seeing arms cross, and I'm seeing some people go like, what? A few people going like, okay, like an open sort of receptivity. Afterwards, it was the buzz of the conference. And the buzz went anywhere and everywhere from who the F does she think she is, um, to like downright anger. Like all she did was tell us everything we're doing is wrong, but she didn't tell us what to do about it. To really the thing that was most moving to me is I had people come up and pull me aside at the conference in the hallway, crying and saying, I think your story, what happened to you, is what happened to me. I think my breathing practice actually my pranayama practice has been making me worse. And I'm experiencing chronic fatigue. I'm experiencing brain fog. I can't function the way I used to, and I keep trying to breathe more to make it better, and it's only getting worse. Help me. And also what I saw in it was something that I had experienced somewhat myself, only I got over it, but because I'm not big into shame, but was this shame. Like, don't tell anybody, because I'm a yogi and I don't want people thinking like I'm a bad yogi because my pranayama practice is making me sick. And I thought, I like really, those were the, like, as hard as it was to be judged, it's like, I'm glad I'm here because I want people to know and know my story. Because in addition to what I told you about, like, with the extended teaching and my granddaughter and singing and all those things, I was also doing those extended exhales, I kept doing more and more extended exhales, and I was chanting. I never shut up, literally. So learning about the value of not talking and not making sound and keeping, like all of those things. Anyway, so out of that, there were some interesting moments. Like my colleague who I just mentioned is over in Ukraine right now. She's not, but her team is helping the troops. Kundalini Yoga, running the yoga therapy program for the Kundalini yoga tradition. She's a brilliant scientist. She's got a doctorate. She came up to me and said, like, Robin, what are you doing? What are you doing with your breath? There's something going on. I brought over to my table. I had a little thing like, about the pH and the, CO2, all this stuff, little pamphlet that people could read through that was on my table. And she's reading through it and she goes, oh my God, we've got it wrong. She's like, this is before I wrote my book. She's like, I need to learn more from you. So we did some sessions. She brought in her senior advisor who had been having some trouble with sleep apnea and snoring. She did some sessions. They used my book in their training program.
That's so
and
cool.
I just met one of the other top trainers at this conference, and she came over in particular to me and said, I just want you to know how important your book is in our training. All of our students are required to read it. It has really transformed how we work and how we teach about the breath. This is Kundalini Yoga, which for those of you who don't know, that's the lineage with the turbans and where there's a lot of hyperventilation practices, basically called Bhastrika and Kapalabhati. And they use those very intentionally, and they can be extremely useful and supportive, as I said. But now they're putting this underlying, let's get people breathing functionally first. And then, let's not put them into a state of hyperventilation.
It's amazing. And how do you communicate this with the average person? Like when I meet people, I'm still figuring this out because most people that have never touched yoga or breath work, they just want to feel good. And that at the end of the day is what we want for everybody, including ourselves, is how do we
Of course.
minimize suffering and add, a little more joy, a little more peace, and a little more health. And in the average conversation at the dinner table or when someone comes up and goes, hey, you're into breath work, and you want to talk to them about, breathing less, breathing more with the belly, using the diaphragm, people really get turned off by the idea of breathing less is good. It's more effective. And especially when you say, maybe even during your workout, start trying to close your mouth and pay attention to breathing through your nose, see how far you can get with that. And if someone's not been breathing through their nose for 25, 30 years or whatever it is, those nasal passages start to close up. So it becomes even more difficult and it can create a lot of that anxiety and issues for people right off the bat. So when you have that initial conversation, what is it like for you to the average person?
Well, as I've learned over the years, being a person who knows a lot about how the body really works, which is different than the word on the street and what people think about, um, it's best to stay as little as possible, right? When you come in, you start lecturing people about their lifestyle and they really didn't invite you to go there, it doesn't go over well. So that's one thing. Humor is definitely a way in. And the way I've learned to talk about it so that it piques people's curiosity, because what you don't want to do is lecture people. You want to pique their curiosity so they inquire for more information, right? So in terms of the idea of breathing less, I use examples like this. If you were in a movie theater and somebody sat down next to you and they were going, oh, 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 like, would you think that they were like chill and relaxed and feeling good? Or would you be like, oh my God, are you okay? Do you want me to call 911? And people get that. I don't have to say anything else. Like, right? So when people are breathing heavily, it's usually a sign of distress. I mean, obviously, there's other reasons one could be breathing like that aren't distressful, that are enjoyable. But in general, right? Like if in a movie theater where clearly they're not having sex, there's a
Yeah.
problem. Okay, so people get that. And then the other thing I'll say is, so if you and an elite athlete were going to walk briskly up a hill, who would be breathing harder, faster, you or the athlete? And everybody gets that too. They're like, well, of course me. I'm like, yes, because if you're in really good aerobic condition, then you breathe lightly. You can exercise more vigorously without getting breathless. Is that not true? And they're like, well, yes. Said, so training yourself like an elite athlete to be able to exercise and move without breathing heavily is better for your health. And then people go, oh, I never thought about it that way.
I love all of those things you said. That's going to be helpful for me because humor definitely helps. And then
Oh, yeah.
with anything, like if you're talking about something important, like, spiritual belief systems or things that are really, close to people's heart, usually it can shut people down. And
Exactly.
there's an art to communicating. And it's like, well, we need to practice that. And a lot of times less is more. And maybe there's even a
Yes.
fun, I've seen people, and now, the more you go down the rabbit hole of breathing, you hear people mouth breathing all the time. And so I go in the sauna like this morning, and there's four guys next to me, and they're all just gasping with their
Yep.
mouths. And I'm like, those poor guys, they don't know any better, but I'm not going to sit here and go, hey, close your mouth. Instead, what I do is I just try to breathe through my nose and be calm and breathe the way that I want to breathe in there. And then it actually is contagious, sometimes, not every time, but I'm wondering if there's a breath practice that you teach people, like a small, short one that you share with the average person once in a while if they're curious, like that shows them and gives them the experience of the power of the breath.
My way in, and I always say I'm a yoga therapist first, Buteyko educator second. I like to get people in their body. I feel like it's a better way in to ground people before you start to reduce their breathing because, as you mentioned, it can trigger a lot of anxiety. And there's reasons for that. It can actually feel very much like people are suffocating. You don't want to take people into that and then expect good results. They just won't practice, they'll give it up. So I start with core breathing. I start with people feeling their body and feeling in control. They can work and feeling strong, like working their abdominal muscles, their pelvic floor, even doing some here, let me just take you through it.
Sure.
Easier than talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So putting your hands, one hand on your lower belly and one hand on your upper belly, and just noticing how much movement is happening down here versus up here, and the direction of the movement, whether it's up, down, or out, in. So um, ideally, most of the time when we're just hanging out, not when we're running vigorously or doing something, calling for help or whatever, when we're just hanging out, we want to have more of a lateral movement and have it be low, working more through the lower lobes of the lungs and engaging more of the diaphragm that sits under the rib cage and the abdominals, as I've been talking about, to engage and support that action. So if you expand your belly, like you push it out like you've got a little food baby, it's the day after Thanksgiving, and you ate the whole thing, right? And then on your exhale, say shh. Can you feel your abdominal muscles kind of grab? That's your transversus abdominis, particularly under your lower hand. You'll probably feel that. So if you do the same thing, push the belly out, do a nice big expansion. And then on your exhale, this time say shh with the first half of your breath and then grrr, like you're Tony the Tiger, growl a little, grrr on the second half. And you should feel the upper abdominals pull in and kind of tether in the rib cage. Okay, so do that like 3 more times just to get the biomechanics, the feel of it. That contraction, like you're zipping up a tight pair of jeans, bottom to top, and then on the inhale, you're releasing the zipper and expanding and releasing out and down. Do that again, please. Okay, yeah, you did a little too long. So those are training wheels. The sounds help people to feel that action. Now let's take it down a notch, which is to say, continue to activate the lower and upper abdominals as if you were saying, shh, girl, but this time just breathe through your nose. But still feel the same level of contraction on the exhale and expansion on the inhale. And if you can't, did you hear yourself breathe there?
A
Okay,
little too
so
overpowering.
yeah, so see if you can lighten it up a little bit so that it's silent. And by the way, this is kind of an interesting thing to play with, is to making the breath lighter, more subtle, but still working muscularly in the same way. It's a good way to prepare for the bandhas, for Uddiyana Bandha, where you're ultimately doing that contraction without any breath. Just notice where your attention goes when the breath becomes quiet and you're really focusing on a lighter breath in and out and a strong abdominal contraction with the exhale and the relaxation on the inhale. It's like really takes your attention inward. So now continue that same process, but take one index finger and put it underneath your nose and just observe the amount of air flow you feel brushing over your finger. And can you just dial it back like 10%, just a little bit lighter? Everything else stays the same, but just the thread of breath becomes a little more delicate. And then if that feels okay, try another 5 or 10%. You kind of want to go right to that point where it feels a little edgy, like that's as much as I can go, or it's going to start to feel a little tense. Right? Just to where it's a little less than satiating, a little bit less than what you would most like. And then relax your hand back to your belly and just sustain that for another few minutes. Breathing in this very light, steady, conscious way. Exhale, gentle, hug inward of the abdominals and release outward of the abdominals with the in-breath. And always know that you have your mental finger on the dial, so if it ever feels like it's a little too little, you can bump it up a little bit so that it feels like it's sustainable. And if you feel like you just kind of went into cruise control where it's just so comfortable and easeful, you kind of lost sight of that edginess, then dial it down a bit. And again, just observe how interior your attention is to sustain this. All of those pieces, as subtle as they are, it's a lot to hold focus for the mind. Nice. And then very gently just relax the breath back to its natural flow. Take another minute to just release the breath, feel kind of filling out into its natural form, and observe the difference between the subtle breathing with that core action and your natural breath, and the overall effect of that mini practice on your system.
It's very nice. I like that you share it that way for sure. Create just the subtle air hunger, not too much, not too overwhelming, and then you get people to focus on their mechanics a little bit too, on the physiology as well. So it brings the awareness down to the body, and it gives people that perfect attention focus, because that's the hardest part for anyone sitting still in our culture is where do you start? It's overwhelming, usually the mind, and then there's too many instructions, and you did it just right. So that's beautiful. That'll be helpful for people.
And I'm
And for
glad.
me. So thank you. That's really
You
cool.
bet.
It's a great little 3-minute, 2-minute practice to share with somebody that gives them at least the awareness piece and a couple physiological shifts.
Exactly. Exactly.
What is the difference for you to speak to yoga therapy versus yoga, in general?
Hmm.
Because you've been doing that a long time, it sounds like.
Yes, I have. Um, okay, so yoga teachers, um, the baseline for a yoga teacher in terms of being a registered yoga teacher with Yoga Alliance is 200 hours. Baseline for becoming a yoga therapist is 800 hours on top of a 200 hour, so 1,000 hours. Okay, so right there, you've got a big difference in terms of the education. The oversight for Yoga Alliance for yoga teachers and yoga teacher trainings is zero. Honestly, I could register my dog to be a yoga teacher or to be a program director for a yoga training school because I know how to fill out the online application and I know how to write a check or register with my credit card. Nobody is checking to see if Dee Dee Marie, my little Boston Terrier pup, is an actual yoga teacher and teaching any of the things that I say online that I'm doing. Okay. It's a registry. It's not a certification body. All they do is take money and say, okay, you're registered. IAYT, the International Association of Yoga Therapists, has an accreditation process, a formal accreditation process that takes about 2 years to go through to become accredited. There's standards and competencies in every accredited school. There's only 70 in the entire world that have passed that bar. And they have to prove, they have to document and show that they hit every single bar. To become a certified yoga therapist, you have to graduate from one of those accredited training programs or get grandfathered in by proving that you already, through a variety of other means, have acquired the same level, that level of competency. Now we're in the process of rolling out the board exam for yoga therapists. So now for anybody who signed up for a training, an accredited training after 2000, from 2023 onward, is required when they finish their program to pass the board exam, which is a 3-hour board exam. It's no joke. So the requirements, like when somebody says they're a certified yoga therapist and they have that IAYT stamp of approval, they know shit. Like they have had a thorough education in anatomy and physiology, in Western psychology, in Yoga Sutras and Ayurveda, right? In how to work with people who have chronic pain, have physiologic conditions, have psycho-emotional conditions. There's a requirement to know yoga well and also know the human condition well, and to be able to speak both the terminology in terms of Western medicine as well as the yoga terminology.
Very cool. And so when someone's seeking to find yoga for the first time, or breathwork even, do you advise them, or not advise, but do you encourage them to seek someone that's considered a yoga therapist?
Well, if people are in pretty good condition and they just want to take a yoga class, I don't care. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But if people have chronic health issues, for sure, going to a yoga therapist makes sense. If they have chronic stress issues, if they're suffering from anxiety, depression, if they are having sleep issues, like working with a yoga therapist makes sense. Now, please understand, I'm one person. I run a training for yoga teachers and yoga therapists to teach them how to work with the breath from this educated perspective, incorporating the biochemistry with the biomechanics and understanding respiratory physiology. But there's not enough of us out there running the training programs. So unfortunately, I go to the conference and the only thing I cringe at is every person who starts the grounding process, like we're going to all ground. So everybody take a deep breath in and sigh your breath out. And I'm just like, okay, I will be happy the day that my colleagues, and some of them have read my book. Now there's people in the room who look at me every time and are like, what's Robin thinking about this? And I'm thinking of just what you're thinking. When is this going to change? When are we going to change this paradigm? But it's still not happening. So there's still, when it comes to asana and adapting asana and using meditation and mantra, mudra, the subtle practices, yoga nidra, for supporting people in health and well-being, yoga therapists know a lot more. Pranayama, we're still not there. We're not where I would like us to be as a body, and I'm working on it. I run a cohort, and yoga teachers out there who really want to learn this, or yoga therapists, come and see me. Go to my website, look at the Restore Your Prana training program. We need you. We need
Yeah.
more people who are educated with the breath, yoga teachers and yoga therapists.
Yeah, cool. I love that. And I also still like to say that I've found teachers early on, like a Dan Brule, who's all about the big,
Yes.
I mean, does it all the time. And in
Yep.
the beginning, I found that to be quite useful to feel myself having permission to breathe in a weird way
Exactly.
and to just
Exactly.
start to explore the breath without too much like, oh, there's rules here and we have to go down the rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
And in the beginning, it's almost like just connect with the breath with awareness, feel it, and then start fine tuning after you bring that relationship in. It's like any relationship, spend
Absolutely.
time with it and you'll know exactly what to do, and then find teachers. But I loved it in the beginning because he was one of those people that was like, just yawn. And I was like, oh yeah,
Exactly.
'cause we have this weird thing about yawning that you're supposed to feel embarrassed, like I'm making you sleepy or something. And it's like, no, I
Mm-hmm.
should be allowed to yawn right now. And so now I intentionally will yawn once in a while. And then I've read like Dylan Werner's book. He's a
Mm-hmm.
yogi from Bali, very smart guy, nice book too, very easy to read. But he's like very anti overbreathe to the point where you're like scared to yawn because you're wasting a breath. And I'm like,
Exactly.
geez,
And
at the end of the
there's
day, who
some of,
gives a shit?
well, well,
But I
so
respect him so
uh,
much too.
again, I mean, there's some of that in the Buteyko and the kind of traditional Buteyko training as well. Where like, don't sigh, don't yawn, don't, don't laugh, like, don't sing, like, don't anything. Um, which actually for me, when I was super sick, was really important because where I was such a severe hyperventilator that I needed, like, my CO2 tank was empty, and I needed to fill, so I needed to shut up. I really did. I needed to shut my mouth and keep it closed. And there are people, like when I work with people with long COVID, my recommendation is put yourself on a silent retreat for 3 days. Close your mouth, have a clipboard, and you can write out, your request or your responses, let everybody in your life know, but really and truly you need to like fill your vessel, right? Fill up your pranic vessel. However, on the other side, you have people who have been raised to never express their feelings, to repress, who are living in trauma where they're constantly holding their breath to become invisible and are paradoxical breathers. And you take somebody like that and you put them in the world of Buteyko, it's a disaster.
Mm,
It just is a re-traumatization of everything that they felt. So Dan Brule and like let it out like that. They need that. That's why I said it's not about right or wrong. It's understand what's the starting point. Years ago, many, many years ago, my husband and I were driving across country from Seattle to Boston. We were moving to Boston. And we got to this crossroads. We had gone up to see the Mount Rushmore. I don't know why we wanted to do that. But anyway, we went to Mount Rushmore. And then we came down and it was like Highway 283, go west or east. We got in this big fight, which is, kind of symbolic of us. Anyway, but he's like, I think we should go west here. And I'm like, okay, I'm just saying. We started in Seattle. We're going to Boston. I think we need to go east. Just logically. Anyway, but you have to know your starting point. If you're at Mount Rushmore and you don't know where you started from, then how do you know whether Boston's east or west? I mean, Chicago, let's say something that's not on a coast. Like you have to have a reference point.
hmm
So, in that same way, for somebody who's really a heavy overbreather, that kind of like pull it in and settle it down, really critical. Somebody who's only lived in this very tight straitjacket, oh no, let them breathe, encourage them to open and feel and all of that, right? So
hmm
I try to stay out of the world of right and wrong and good and bad. Understand the intention, understand who's in front of you, understand the biomechanics and the chemistry, everything, and then put that together so that you formulate a practice that's truly healthy and supportive for this individual or this group.
That's perfect. I love that you spoke to it that way because there's a lot of, like I said, dogma in things that get so rigid, and then you make people afraid to even go to a yoga studio because they
I
don't have the
know.
big brimmed hat and the yoga beads and the soft talking or
I know.
the language and all the stuff. That's all good. I can go to Burning Man and I can go to these yoga studios, but then you're like, now my captain can't come because he thinks that it's a cult. And it's
Yes.
like, let's strip all this stuff away and let's get to the root of it. And it seems like you've done a really good job over the years of finding that language and the energy to communicate it in a way that you do that's more accessible to people. And
That
that's
I
what we
wanted to
want.
say, I teach people.
Yeah.
You know, you said it very early on. I say it all the time to my yoga therapy trainees who are I run an accredited training program, and I say, don't talk yoga talk. People are there because they're in chronic pain, because they're sick, because they're stressed. They're not there to learn yoga. They're there to feel better. Teach them, give them tools to feel better, and then they might be interested in yoga down the. You're right. They might come back and be like, I want to learn more. I've had people who have, you know, come back to me are like, I'm really like, I was never interested in yoga, but now I am. But it's like the Buddha said, you know, don't preach the Dharma, feed the people first.
Mm.
So in that same way, I'm interested in making the beautiful tools and the wisdom, the teachings of yoga accessible. They are for everybody. I don't care where you are in life. I don't care what your political leaning is. I don't care what you do for a living or for fun or whatever. Yoga is beneficial because it's really about bringing your mind, your body, your heart, everything into balance. What that means for you, for a big old weightlifter, let's, you know, stretch and become a little more agile. But for the temple dancers who are all hypermobile and bendy all over the place, I'm like, no vinyasa flow. Get thee to the gym, pump, 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 right?
I love it. No, I can see that you're very easy to connect with. Something that I ask every guest, because I ask all my friends, and it's important to me, is, and you don't have to answer, if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world?
Oh, uh, so I'll frame it a little bit.
Yeah.
3 years ago, my entire life imploded. I don't need to go into the details, but um, there's literally before and after, right? I spent a lot of what was my life before, which was most of my life. I'm 64, so that was a lot of decades. Unhappy, um, striving to uh, make things work for other people and not really seeking joy. Every day now, my life is filled with joy. And I've experienced in these past 3 years more grief and more loss than I would ever wish on anybody. But in that, I have also learned to value every little beacon of light, every opportunity to connect with a person, to do something that just for the fun of it. And I hope until the day I die, I don't lose it. And I wish that everybody makes choices that bring them more joy, because what I hear from the people in my life is that they find me like there's more, I'm more me. So there's more to share. There's more light within me, less of that heaviness. And so all that I was bringing forward before with my teaching, I teach now with a quality of lightness and playfulness and joyfulness. And it's way more fun to teach. And what I see is that my students are actually sparked by that, and they beat up on themselves far less. There's a lot more forgiveness, a lot more appreciation for just like whatever. We're practicing. We're practicing living in this moment. And that was a little bit of a fuck up. Whatever. Move on. Like, don't get bogged down by it. So joy.
I love that. Joy is a good message for people in the world. And it seems like you've probably found your way to grieve, because if you couldn't, you didn't make space for that, you wouldn't be able to have that opposite expression of joy. So that's something I like to remind myself and
Yeah,
others too, is like
definitely
you better create
didn't
space for
bypass
that
the
grieving.
grief.
Yeah,
There
so
was
you
no
got
way
it.
out from it. It was everywhere. There was just nothing. It was like my life got firebombed. So I there was no avoidance, no denying. It was just everywhere. So then I had to say, okay, how can I be in it? Like, I could be grieving and be so joyful and appreciative of the gifts and the love and the support I was receiving from everybody. And yeah, it was really a remarkable, and it continues to be a remarkable journey that way. I still blink and can't believe it feels like that whole life before was a dream, and it was most of my life.
Amazing. Two different people, two different lives almost.
Yes, yes.
Cool. Anything you want to share with the listeners, whoever's listening to this, before we end this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to speak more directly to the first responders because I've worked um, with several people in the police department and fire department. And, uh, you know, your work is so incredible and important, and you are incredible and important. And learning self-care techniques is is critical to your capacity to care for others. And obviously, there's a high value in caring for others and serving, but it's no different than my moms who come in and they're so preoccupied with, I've got to be on call for my kid all the time, and they're stressed. I'm like, okay, but back in the day, I didn't have cell phones. My kids are 38 and 40. They survived. If they bonked I always say the same thing, like, did you leave them with somebody that you're comfortable with? Well, their dad. And do you trust him? Yes. Then turn your friggin' phone off and have an hour and a half time to self-care. So, like, self-care is really, really important, and it doesn't make you lesser than. It will actually feed you, nourish you in the way that really good, healthy, organic food nourishes you and supports your cells. It will light you up and give you more to offer from, as one of my teachers said, it's a Sufi saying, give from the top of the well, not from the dregs. But if you're not filling your own vessel up with good self-care techniques, then you're constantly scraping the bottom and always feeling depleted. And that will set you up for back injuries, for stress issues, for sleep issues, for relationship issues, for resentments, anxiety, depression. So you know, don't be afraid to reach out and invite in some of those self care techniques. It's really important.
That's really important message, especially for first responder culture, because I'm 43, and when I was 29 and I had that injury, it didn't
Yeah.
come from my physiology as much as it came from my over activity. And it took me 3 years to learn how to slow down and give
Hmm.
myself permission to be, to have a day off and to feel
Yes.
okay about it without that should be doing something. And in
Yes.
our culture, everyone has second jobs, and a lot of them have kids and wives. And of course, they got to
Yep.
pay the bills. It's scarcity
Yeah.
mode out there. But, you do have a lot more to give when you rest and you find good sleep habits and you find good self care
Absolutely.
and yoga and massage or whatever those things are. It's like give that to yourself and really fill that vessel up. And in order to be of service, you have to be fit for service. And I love your message there, because a lot of our culture almost feels shame and guilt
Exactly. Well,
for
it's
having a
because
day off.
it's the way that we are raised. I mean, I think male first responders and women get that message, right? That you always have to be available for the other, right? And that somehow taking time for yourself is selfish.
Yeah.
And I think, we've got to shift the messaging. And the best people to do that are people like you who are in the culture, who are sharing it with people so you can speak to directly to to that language and that culture, like that you all share, that common culture, and have come through it and come out the other side and know the difference. I have a number of people in my trainings through the years who are veterans and come from a similar culture and then learning yoga and then taking yoga back to work with other veterans. And it's a hard sell, but once they switch, honestly, nobody goes back and says, yeah, I'm going to become unmindful about myself now that I spent 6 months in mindfulness training. Like, nobody wants to go back because it's like feeling at home inside of yourself. What better way to move through life than feeling at home and
Mm.
comfortable in your own body with your own mind, feeling settled. Like, I live here and it's okay.
That's amazing. I love your message, and you seem like such a unique, special human. I hope I can come learn from you someday for sure.
Come on up. That would be fun.
Yeah,
Or have
definitely.
me come down, but not
Yeah,
in the summer. I'm not coming down to 112. Forget that. I
no.
did that.
Come in the spring or the winter for sure.
Okay. All right.
Cool. Well, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to getting to know you more in the future.
Thank you, Ryan. Me as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.